Caddis Maximus here, this time with a review and comparison of small side cutters. These would be small electronic wire cutters is how I describe them, and generally speaking just small side cutters. Although not all of these are quite side cutters, we do have some end cutters here, as well as some 45-degree angle cutters. This also allows us to compare some various different brands from Olympia, X-Light, Klein, GC, Diamond, which is part of Crescent now, but not when those were made. We have some of the general Huskies, we have some Channellocks here, we have some Lindstroms, which are some real nice ones, and then we have a couple of cutters that actually aren't designed for wire cutting, but are pretty easy to find and end up working very well for a variety of cutting operations. And little cutters like this are totally necessary in electronics. They aren't the greatest to use for more general construction use because you need more leverage in larger cutters. But these, for any kind of small, more detailed work, for a variety of crafts and service work, you'll definitely want to have a nice set of small cutters. Now, one thing about the different styles is just because you have different access to different things. End cutters are nice. These are sold as larger ones, you know, they might be known as rivet cutters, but they just allow you to cut perpendicular to the surface. You can cut off the end of a wire or cut something flush, and that's what makes these real handy. Also, because the jaws are so close, you always get a lot of leverage. And then they usually flare so that you can have something pass through that's longer than the opening in the jaw. And of course, these are Huskies. They use two spring tines that are, I believe, either tack welded or just held in by this overcoating. This type of spring system has generally worked okay for me, but it seems after a while one of these inevitably falls off or fatigues and fails. But they use this design so they don't have to deal with drilling a small blind holes to put in a normal spiral spring. We have some old Diamond, which are now part of Crescent, but not when these were made. To demonstrate how old these are, if we can get, there we go. You can barely see it, but the stamp on this thing is microscopic. It's like 1/8 of an inch, and it's the little diamond and horseshoe. And these are 45-degree angle cutters, so they're kind of similar to the Huskies, where you can do a pass-through, but they just allow you to work at a 30-degree angle. That way they're offset. So you have side cutters where you cut from the side. We can cut from this angle, or we can cut straight on, and that's why you would want to have a variety of cutters like this, is so that you can have an easier time of getting things just right. Oftentimes you see wires that are cut at a heavy slant because you couldn't really get side cutters in at the right angle, and then they don't terminate very well because of that, because they're not cut squarely. All you need is just a couple different cutters to make that not such a tough situation. Let's go and take a look. These are just the Husky side cutters, same kind of design as the end cutters. These are Chinese ones. Let's take a look at the Channellocks. I did like the Channellocks. They have a similar spring design, but they are a little bit more robust. They're curved on the Channellocks, and I believe that's to help offset, so there isn't quite as much of a stress riser inside the handles, such as the little straight tines, these Huskies. If you look, a lot of the bending happens real concentrated spot up in the handle, where these are more progressive, although the spring tension isn't quite as tight. I really like the way that these Channellocks are. Oh, I didn't realize that. These are made in Germany, so I didn't realize these were German-made Channellocks, because they have a really nice head. I mean, it's totally machined and ground. I really like that it's all the angles and everything are really square on it. I really like how it's deeply cut out. These have really been go-to, and they have these they're really short, but they have these really bulbous, soft grip handles, and these have just been amazing for me. Pretty much one of the best ones, to tell you the truth, and now I realize that they are German, I can understand why. That would be compared to the Huskies or the Olympias. Most side cutters are like this, where they just have a kind of a triangular shaped jaw. They're not particularly sharp on the angle here to give a little more strength to the teeth. And the Huskies are the same thing, just chrome plated. And those would be the Olympias. However, these Olympias, they use a spring, and I've had better luck with pliers that use coil springs. They seem to last longer, even though occasionally the springs can fall out. I haven't had that much of a problem. The next ones are these Xcelites, which seem to be really popular. I've watched quite a few YouTube videos, and I know they're popular because you recognize these. They're the infamous orange handle little cutters. And these are okay, although they're stamped steel and ground. They do have thin jaws, but as we just saw, maybe compared to the Channellocks, even though the jaws are a little thinner, they just have nowhere near the strength or precision of cutting. One of the issues is after you use them, the jaws kind of offset, and it almost seems how they cut. They kind of cut through the wire and then they pull it apart. And so these have now ended up being more just general use cutters, just because there isn't enough meat to really keep those jaws nice and straight and parallel. They're reasonably priced, but I still think they're a little expensive just for being a ground piece of bent sheet metal, to tell you the truth, even though they're Xcelites. If we look at these Kleins, there's obviously a huge difference. The Kleins are really good. They're like those Channellocks, really beautifully made. The deal with Kleins is they really make a little bit extra thick handles. Even their small cutters are bigger than most of these other cutters down here, and they're obviously a little heavier, these little larger handles, but it's surprising. You can really squeeze on these and feel the strength. These are definitely the real deal. Of all these small cutters, none of these are designed for cutting hard wire. They're not made for cutting steel wire except for a soft like tie wire. But you don't want to ever cut any piano wire or bicycle spokes or anything like that. You need special cutters for hardened wire. Welding wire also is included. That's a very hard wire. So these are all rated for soft wire, copper wire, etc. But if we look at these Kleins, they have a design similar to the Channellocks here. There we go. But just a little bit more meaty, a little bit heavier duty. And that's what I really appreciate about the Kleins. They have a nice angles inside there. Additionally, they have really good clearance. And they just cut beautifully. Whenever you cut anything with these Kleins, it's always just a nice... Although they still need to break in. These are brand new. Although admittedly, as I'm using the Kleins right here, you got to put a little bit of pressure because they need to break in. They kind of make them a little bit tight at the bottom of the jaw, so as it wears. But I've been noticing that you have to get quite a bit of force, but they still don't quite snip. It seems there may have been just a little bit of an issue with the grinding of one of the bevels. But they are very strong, so these would be more for solid core wire. And the reason I point that out is we were talking about the Channellocks so much, because when you cut with the Channellocks, the wire just pops off. Which actually surprised me because wasn't quite expecting that. The next ones we have is some super tiny GC electronics, and one of the reasons I like them, even though they're stamped sheet metal, they're sheet metal, even though they're a smaller plier. If we compare to those Xcelites, the metal is nearly twice as thick as the Xcelites. And I thought, that's GC, it's a much cheaper brand. They allow you to get a deeper bevel. They have a real nice solid core rivet. And then the spring that they use, I thought, is a great idea. It's a very heavy-duty kind of wishbone spring, and it's always worked reliably. And these are some of my go-tos because of how well they cut. They're really beautiful. We can look at the backside here and see how well they're ground. And the purpose for a review like this is so you can have some idea. And these kind of little cutters, inevitably, because they're small, get damaged easily. So you end up replacing them relatively often. And so it's just kind of nice to know what brands you would really want to get into. And then here's the diamonds. I wanted to show how those cut. They are a little funky, and they are almost brand new. And so that's one thing to pay attention to, is if you're in a store, is to take a close look at the jaws, because if they didn't get ground quite right, they really won't cut very nicely. The next ones we're going to look at here are these Lindstroms. And Lindstrom is known as being a very professional brand. These are really expensive. I think these are like $20 or something just for a tiny set of cutters. But they are pretty amazing because they are, I don't know if they're heavy-duty plate or if they're actually forged. But they look forged. They pretty much have the best fit and finish. They have a nice reinforced eyelet, which I thought was interesting. That's inserted into the head to hold the screw. They have this beautiful little shape where they are strong at the base but then taper down into this really tight cutting area. And these are pretty much perfect. The Lindstroms, I would have to say, are, as far as real production grade tools, if you are in an electronics manufacturing company, you might see Lindstrom tools. And so I just wanted to point that out of what a really high grade, kind of like Snap-on of small wire working tools would be Lindstrom. And these things are absolutely beautiful. Although I'll have to point out, I did get these used. They did have the kind of tine spring in them, and the tine springs did fail in these Lindstroms. So they have a beautifully machined head, but their spring system didn't really hold up. And the jaws do get a little bit loose. You constantly have to retighten them, but that happens with pretty much any of these pliers. But that would also be an argument from using pliers which use a cold forged pivot like on these Kleins. Here we go. Where this tends to hold tighter over a longer period of time than something like this, which is based on threads. And the last couple things I wanted to show here real fast are actually sold as cat claw cutters or dog claw cutters, but the really, here we go, the really beveled curves in them mean that they cut wire much more effectively. I shouldn't say effectively, but they don't squish it as much because it isn't two halves that are just pinching together. The curve helps kind of draw the wire and cut it in a circular fashion, and what you'll notice is you can put almost no pressure whatsoever and the wire just cuts. These are a straight version of the same thing, so it gives you the same type of real smooth cutting action, but being able to be head on onto the wire. So that was just to point out how sometimes odd tools like claw cutters can be very handy in small electronics. And that's generally why I have a collection of whatever we have here, 10 or 11 of these tools, is so you can have heavier duty ones like these Kleins, which you use for more of the kind of dirty work, those in the Olympias where you don't mind damaging so much. And then you have finer quality ones that you use for more precision work that you make sure not to damage. And then that's the beauty of having a tool collection, is then you really have a tool for any job so you can get it done quickly, but not worry about either damaging a nice cutter or having a nice cutter that doesn't give you enough force to cut something more heavy duty like the Kleins would. Anyway, once again, thank you so much for watching a Catus Maximus review. If you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe. Bye.